Hello, everyone. This is Voice of the People with Stefan Bertram. I'm joined today once again by Quinn and Kuba. And today we're going to be discussing a kind of interesting and horrendous feature of our kind of postmodern world, which is these groups of people who are trying to enact. It's hard to say, are they ironic? Do they truly believe? But they're Satanists in some sense. They're demons. They want to be demons. They think there are demons and they want to be demons. Discussing these Nazis who have become more and more prominent because of the war in Ukraine, because of their influence on various mass shooting events in the United States and Russia and elsewhere. And then, if we have time, we're going to go on to the other sort of kind of spirited entities that are increasingly filling our world, which are the new AI agents, which are driving those inclined to madness to even greater madness. I think our beat on the Nazis is going to be led by Quinn. So first, Quinn, I'm going to put a video of Vladimir Putin to you from yesterday.
Exciting.
Hopefully the audio works on this. If not, then
I totally agree with you. Satanism and cult services, sorceries, this is nonsense. That is something that confuses people, brings them to darkness, and affects them greatly. Affects their psyche, their morale, and we need to fight against it, but do it carefully without violating human rights. Your colleagues have mentioned it as
Kuba, so do you agree with Vladimir Putin that Satanists, demons, and sorcerers are a major problem currently facing the world, and that we need to fight against them, but be careful to defend human rights at the same time?
Well, I do recognize the security issue that President Putin is describing, but I think that he has the valence all wrong. The issue is not the prevalence of Satanists and sorcerers and other spiritual formations, but actually the existence of a sorcerer gap. What we need to do is we need to develop our own esoteric domains, right? The astral plane is becoming a war-fighting domain. The human soul is indeed the last battlefield. And
yeah, we need white hat demonologists. We need white hat socialists.
Is this where the Etsy witches come into this?
Precisely. Like if you
They don't seem very powerful though. I don't, but maybe it's because of a lack of training.
Well, ask Charlie Kirk. However, to tie this a little into the technological part that you teased for me, I recently discovered that there's a Rand Corporation report about the potential weaponization of AI psychosis. Right? In some ways, it's an update of the whole, MK Ultra for the AI age, right? That there is a potential vector for a security-oriented strategic mind control through manipulating AI platforms, right?
Yeah, it's much cheaper than having like a woman do it.
Yeah, well, the trick is to actually get a female AI to do it, because that way you can only pay them 60% of what a regular AI would cost.
Yeah, female AI agents use a lot less power. Quinn, could you give us kind of a brief overview of, because obviously I'm familiar with this stuff, at least broadly, I assume Cuba is too, but there are going to be some people in the audience who are like, what the fuck do you mean that there are evil Satanists on the internet making people do mass shootings and also they're in Ukraine?
So I think a good place to start with this is David Mamet and the Order of the Nine Angles. This is a like an extremist group that was started by Mamet in the 70s in the UK. He likes to tell this story of him being met by like a mysterious shaman woman who gave him these tenets. And actually, the Order of Nine Angles has been a secret cult for thousands of years, like pre-Christian.
Classic. You'll love to do that.
Complete bullshit. He made it all up. And it's a weird mishmash of, Satanism, occultism, Hitlerite neo-Nazism, and like a real kind of nihilistic outlook on kind of human beings, civilization, life itself. It's not a super cheery outlook on life. And so their whole organization is premised on this idea of like a cell, like a revolutionary cell, detached from large organizations. They do kind of individualized acts of violence in order to try to cause they're early accelerationists. So they want to use violence to push them towards the racial holy war that they think will get them the white paradise that they want. This was a presence in like the kind of underground scene through Europe and into America for a few years, but it wasn't very popular because these guys are like weird and off-putting and no one likes them. Like, if your pitch is, hey, come like hang out with like 3 guys in the wilderness and we're going to like, murder a person and then like dress up like Satanists, there's not a lot of pull there. They maybe had some.
If you do it on Discord.
But if you do it on Discord. So in the kind of late or mid, probably early 2010s is when it really started. They got a hold of this text by another kind of failed American neo-Nazi named James Mason, who wrote this book called Siege, which is published then by this guy Joshua Sutter, who we'll get back to in a second. This kind of milieu of accelerationist neo-Nazis creates a bunch of problems and becomes like a really online phenomenon. Siege and like being siege pilled is like becomes a whole, like it becomes so well known that it becomes a joke. You might know of organizations they're like 6 guys with a bunch of guns and individualized psychosis, but groups like the Base or Atomwaffen Division are popular in the US. There's another one in the UK, which I'm blanking on the name of. They're also big in Eastern Europe, which I think we'll get back to a little bit with the whole Ukraine and Russia thing, because they did actually kind of gain a lot of footholds there.
Because I know that Atomwaffen and that kind of vibe is quite popular in like the extremist part of the extremist group of Azov in Ukraine.
Yeah, and I think that they started to claim being Atomwaffen because like Atomwaffen got a little bit of press, and then they think that it'll get them attention too. The actual links between the Atomwaffen guys and the guys in Ukraine are like pretty tenuous, and it seems like both of them are kind of like claiming credit for each other, but there's no real crossover.
Up to the same stuff.
Yeah. And they are actually up to some pretty gross crimes over there, but the idea of this kind of cell annexion is extended out. It proliferates online, and you get these cells on Discord that are like, there's some evidence that there's a little bit of kind of sponsorship, that there are intelligence agencies kind of using this to try to destabilize the kind of home societies of people that they're at war with. But a lot of that stuff is tenuous, and it's really hard to prove anything. What we do know is that there are groups like 764, which was started by a 14-year-old in Texas. 764 is, I think, the area code of like the phone number of like his area. it is a kind of these are the people that
6-7 led by a 12-year-old child.
Oh my god, I think that's probably what's next. But these are the groups that the FBI is talking about when they talk about NVE or nihilistic violent extremism. It's 764. The kid that ran it was eventually arrested, but it took him a while, and the kind of aesthetics have kind of gotten way past him as an individual. What 764 is it took some elements from CVLT, which is another kind of post 09A online group. It is a sextortion cult that is run by and targeting minors. It is children getting each other to like perform like acts of animal cruelty or self-harm, or like creating child exploitation content of themselves, recording that, and then using it to blackmail them into even more extreme acts, eventually like including murder.
And this is children manipulating other children.
Primarily. At least that's what we have evidence for. There is evidence that there's some like adults in the room that are also pushing these like kids towards, horrific acts.
You age out of it eventually.
Maybe. It's hard to say.
No, I mean in the sense that not necessarily you get over it, but rather you just become an adult nihilist.
Yeah. So like there's some evidence that there's like, like people into their late 20s, but it seems to be very youth focused, with the majority being like very, very young, like tweens and teens. And you see that in like in the Eastern world, there was a German national who was like shipped off to Romania as part of some like troubled teen program. And it was kind of approaching his 18th birthday. His life was like, he had no real prospects. And he was groomed by one of these groups to commit he stabbed like an 80-year-old woman on camera. Like he live streamed himself doing the murder. There are, and the kind of aesthetics, the writing all over all of your stuff with different like references, especially on your like weapons. I think he was specifically tied to the No Lives Matter spinoff of 764 that is also tied to this kid who stabbed another child in Moscow like a week or two ago. It's really a lot of dark stuff, and I think it's concerning for most adults that see it. Across kind of political divides.
That's interesting to me about the youth angle here is how one issue that any aggressive, violent society has, whenever you look at groups like, the ancient Spartans or the Aztec, if you find a psycho-fascist culture with human sacrifice and warfare as their cultural touchstones, you also will find specific cultural institutions that are meant to cultivate the violent impulse in young people, especially young men. You don't get psychos willing to carry out genocide or extremely brutal forms of violence naturally. There is that 1 or 2% of the general population that have what's now described as psychopathy used to be described as sociopathy, right? The low affect, difficulty to empathize, easy to instrumentalize other people form of mental illness. But that's only 1 or 2%, and they're not reliably where you need them to be if you're trying
they're
to
often
practice.
not very stable and kill the wrong people.
Exactly. And the ones that are capable are some of the most threatening motherfuckers you can imagine, right? Like they become challenges to incumbent leadership unless they can be co-opted. So you need a way to, one, corral the effective psychopaths, and two, psychopathize the relatively normal psychology of other young men so that they can become your stormtroopers, so that they can carry out your genocidal imperialist fantasies. One
JSOC.
problem, yeah, precisely. JSOC, the SEAL Team 6, there's a certain amount of that grooming that gets built into military training, especially for special forces, right? They copy what, or they imagine what Native American, what Comanche coming of age rituals might be, and then they integrate them. I know that the Navy SEALs hand out tomahawks as their kind of totemic weapons to the operators that go out in the field, and that one issue with some of the kill missions in Afghanistan and Iraq was that they wanted to use those tomahawks, right? So you had people being hacked to death once the SEALs had established control over whatever perimeter they had been given.
If I remember right, I think Petraeus put out like a press release that was like, "We do not condone scalping."
Yeah, which is a funny thing when it crosses your desk, right? It's like, I didn't realize that this was going to be an issue. And I think that what these groups are doing too is an attempt to normalize and broaden, to make young men into these violent operators. And whether it's for the lulz or whether it's somebody who imagines one day that these guys are going to grow up to be you start the Hitler Youth, not because you want a bunch of psychopathic 12-year-olds, but because in 10 years you want to harvest your first crop of SS. And there's an open question as to whether, now that the world is heading towards much more conflictual, violent direction, where irregular warfare, state terrorism against populations, or counter-regime terrorism as well, different types of political extremist violence, are going to be a routine part of political competition. Well, where's your psycho pipeline? Because if you don't control the football teams already, you have to figure out where you're going to get the stormtroopers of the future. And some of these online extremist groups seem to have a little bit of that cultivation angle, right? Just like sometimes people are groomed to be targets for sexual exploitation, there's an element of grooming people to be your violent foot soldiers, I think, in these movements.
And I think there's a larger conversation to be had about like how much American football is a tool for that kind of thing, for militarization of the American society. But it is, I think, really interesting to look at like these kind of groups specifically, because both of the main figures I mentioned earlier do have like links to some kind of intelligence apparatus. Myatt has, I think, pretty credible links to English intelligence or British intelligence, and Sutter, who he's an American, big beard, balding, not particularly attractive. He, got to get my shots in when I can. He runs a publishing house that is responsible for publishing most of the kind of O9A accelerationist Nazi literature. He is an FBI informant, well documented, and like at this point kind of proud of it. Like he thinks it makes him cool that he snitches to the FBI. It does mean that the FBI has like knowledge and for, you know, in a very real way funds a lot of the like production of this extremist literature in like a pretty dangerous way. But I think that that's a larger conversation to be had about like how the FBI deals with its informant system. There's
It's quite a
pretty
quaint,
problematic system of like quotas on how many informants that you have to run as an FBI case officer. It's
there's
not a
quite
fun
there's
thing
quite
to
a
read about.
quaint political scandal going on in the UK at the moment, where the MI5, our internal security service, were protecting for a long time like a violent neo-Nazi who was just like, especially with his long-term girlfriend, was terrorizing, but also just doing like various violent stuff or whatever. And the controversy, the great thing is obviously the MI5 for a long time blatantly lied to judges and blatantly lied to the BBC about what was going on with this guy. And through political pressure, MI5 has now had to launch an investigation into how could it possibly become the case that they lied to judges and they lied to the BBC as if it wasn't just completely normal institutional practice to do this.
Yeah, there's I think one of the important places where the occult world and the intelligence service world overlap is that both require the suspension of conventional bourgeois morality for people to be effective. You need individuals who are willing to operate beyond the lines of comfortable, everyday establishment decency. And that comes with other personality elements. Somebody who treats bourgeois conventions as bullshit, right? That liberal democracy is hopelessly cucked and you don't need to take any of those strictures seriously. Well, what psychological and moral limitations are they going to practice instead? And when the door opens like that, there's a reason why the U.S. military, the regular system, the regular training for soldiers, boot camp, etc., has such an emphasis on civic, Republican, small r indoctrination, because you want that to fill the void that you can't shove Christ into, and you also replaces the don't kill people, be nice to others, defer, don't impose your vision, right? Like golden mean kindergarten good behavior default that a lot of people settle into, for sensible reason. That's just what comes with basic human empathy. So you have to pierce that, and then you don't know what's going to come through. Are you going to, once you puncture somebody, once they're red-pilled and they understand that all of this system around us is contingent and has no moral reality to it beyond what people ascribe to it, then maybe they're going to find their answers in weird forms of esoteric thought, which goes all the way back to, of course, the Nazis and fascism 1.0.
Right, because obviously as an intelligence service agent, you're going to be seeing the guts of the bourgeois system. That's basically the entire point of your existence.
Exactly. You're doing the things that aren't supposed to be necessary, that aren't supposed to be done by a system as evolved as ours. And therefore, you can't be constrained by the superstructural psychology that comes with being a properly adjusted member of that society.
Because on top
And
of taking scalps and so on, the other stuff that U.S. Special Forces in Afghanistan are getting up to, a lot of them spend a lot of time standing outside the doors of pedophiles, getting on about their pedophile business.
absolutely. And you can see an obvious inflection point there in the careers of many people in not just American but NATO military. Many of the Canadians who came back from Afghanistan were absolutely radicalized by their experience of working closely with Pashtun, largely Pashtun Afghan security forces that routinely practice pedophilia. They come back and they're like, never again. That's insane. Why were we doing that? Whereas other people come back and their lesson is to be effective in security operations, you just have to be willing to suspend any kind of conventional morality, any kind of limitations. Work with pedophiles, work with genocidaires, work with opium smugglers. It's kind of ridiculous, all of this pressure being placed on Venezuela over the phantom fentanyl, when much of the original opioid crisis was brought about by heroin coming through semi-military, semi-clandestine, semi-allied channels from Afghanistan to the West.
Yeah, it's more GWAT blowback.
Absolutely. And I think that there isn't the appreciation of what the psychological and social aspects are of blowback. The 9/11 was kind of a revenge from the Muslim world in that sense, right? The consequences were coming in because you cozied up to the wrong people, so to speak. But I think that what we've already talked about, the special forces, the Fort Bragg cartel, etc., you put your young men through this kind of psychopathy machine. You expose them to some of the most violent and dangerous networks in the world. So they develop associations in Asia, in the Middle East, in Latin America, with cartels, with gangs, with different types of local criminal and security actors. And then you're shocked that they consider themselves to be beyond good and evil, and they
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it,
bring
it's
that
not like
darkness.
you don't see like a particular moral rot in the heart of these guys. You rather see the circumstances they were in and the training they were given and the places they were and blah, blah. And you go like, yeah, I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, well, and the thing is that without any kind of supervision, without any curbs, there's an incentive structure that helps people mature into those types of operators, right? If you're the sort of person who says, no, this is wrong, I'm not going to work with cartels, then there are mechanisms to weed you out, right? Or at least to firewall you away from the operators that are up to the bad business, because in some ways, both the disciplined and controlled violent operative and the out of control psycho are just different types of tools in the same kit. One is good for certain circumstances, certain missions, certain purposes, the other for others. You're especially now that the United States military is being put on a course to violate all kinds of well-established international norms and elements that were part of the indoctrination, the Democratic, Republican, U.S. civic indoctrination of the U.S. Armed Services. You're cutting against that, so you're going to need more rule breakers, and those rule breakers don't stop at the rules you don't dislike, you don't like. They'll break the rules that they don't like, right?
That's definitely. I was going to say that's definitely the case in the kind of stuff that Putin is talking about domestically. Like I think there's some decent evidence that both Russia and Ukraine have tried to capitalize off of this milieu in order to like leverage it against each other. The Russian volunteer corps
both groups are definitely doing the thing where they exploit and hire out like teens to do like, you're like, oh, do some petty vandalism, blah blah blah. Then they end up trying to get them to organize a bombing or whatever.
Yeah, and Ukraine maybe seems to have slightly better control over their like insane like little neo-Nazi cults because they have like a real direction to point them in.
Well, also probably because Western intelligence is helping.
That's true. But as we can see with like 764 is a US based problem. This is not a problem that is contained, and the internet has opened up the possibility of different kind of threat vectors. We've seen some like links to this in attacks in like Indonesia and even I think there was one in South America as well.
But because obviously the war in Ukraine is very bad. I do worry a lot about what's going to happen when it ends.
Yeah,
because it's going to be 20, 30, 40 years where kind of those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands, probably up to 1 million or more men who have been trained and hardened and sharpened in Ukraine on both sides are then dominating the global security situation at a time where it's genuinely deteriorating. And these people are going to be used by, both sides to try and simultaneously prop up the security situation while at the same time try and take it down. Like, I imagine if a ceasefire came in, then probably both Ukraine and Russia would both become much more active in Africa, where they're already both present.
Yeah.
I think that a lot depends on how you handle the demobilization of soldiers and to what extent there's a pipeline that goes from veteran to student or worker. One of the
especially like student worker in Germany.
Well, that's the thing, right? There's greater prospect for veterans on the Ukrainian side, I'd say, because there's going to be a lot of labor required to rebuild and shore up Ukrainian infrastructure, and continuing ongoing need for a substantial domestic garrison of forces to keep an eye on Russia. Compared to, and as a share of population, that's going to be a lot bigger a footprint in Ukraine than in Russia. So there's more places to put young post-military men than I think there are spots for them in Russia. And the second is that there is a very obvious complementarity between Ukraine and the core European countries, where you have Germans and French, Italians and Dutch writing checks that support a European defense, which is largely carried out by lower cost, frontline, experienced Ukrainians.
Right. If Western Europe can just pay to have Ukrainian tank corps in Estonia or whatever, and then they don't have to pay their own much more expensive troops or try to keep America there, and America's increasingly just being like, yeah, we'll stay if you pay us. In that circumstance, Ukraine is a great low price option.
Exactly. And
also the front line has worked pretty well as a kind of R&D field for all of the drone technology, but just anytime your defense contractor has stuff that they want to test, send it to Ukraine. You'll get accurate, really reliable test data.
Instant feedback.
Exactly. And that it's quite a bit cheaper to send it to just be used than to do your focus groups and lab testing and all this.
Yeah,
they'll shoot it off.
Ukraine is to military R&D what Africa is to pharma, right?
Yeah.
But I think that together, the security requirements for Europe, together with the potential for EU accession and the access to EU job markets, that is an excellent carrot for keeping some type of limitation on the really bad forms of demobilization that we've seen historically in other places. I would contrast, for instance, post-war Serbia in the 90s and 2000s with post-war Germany after World War I, where Germany is overrun by Freikorps, by different paramilitary formations, and the government and the security services during the Weimar era have this very tense relationship. And you really do have large-scale destabilization and the entry of fascism and different kinds of dangerous intellectual currents as a result of that botched demobilization together with the botched economic policies. Whereas in Serbia, a lot of Serbs were able to, one way or another, reach Western job markets, which could absorb people. There were also opportunities for expansion into, let's say the just criminal world, where all you're doing is stealing cars and trafficking people, not necessarily attached to political destabilization or some kind of nihilistic far-right mission. And despite the large number of men that were involved in the Yugoslav conflict, despite the level of atrocity that happened there, despite the traumatizing experiences that were inflicted on an entire generation, you didn't necessarily have the same roiling destabilization and the prelude to consolidated fascism across the Balkans that you did in post-war Germany. I hope that the Ukrainian situation can mirror Yugoslavia more than Germany. I fear that the Russian situation will mirror not only post-war Germany, because a lot of these guys will come home and join Wagner or other private, quasi-private mercenary groups that then metastasize that violence all over the world. But there's an excellent book by Vadim Volkov called Violent Entrepreneurs about the origins of Russian organized crime. And he points out that it doesn't spring up from nothing. What you have is pre-existing social networks or institutions that then take on a violent mafia style role when they see an opportunity in the the post-socialist economic ecosystem. And one of the biggest groups was Soviet veterans of the Afghan War, because they had fought with one another. They belonged to units. They knew how to cooperate. They were familiar with guns, with weapons, with violent operations, and they felt like the country owed them something that they had never received. So the Russians coming back may reproduce the same pattern within a Russia that I wish I understood it better now. It is difficult to get good information on the political situation within Russia. I don't know how strong Putin is. I don't know, more importantly, I don't know how much of his authority structure is institutionalized well enough so it can outlast him. If something happens to Putin,
I think the really interesting thing about Putin's Russia is his constant attempt not to develop like mass politics in his favor, but just to constantly kill off all forms of politics. Not to have mobilization in his favor, but to have society not mobilized in any way towards anything. And obviously
Yeah.
that was something that became more of a struggle to kind of square the circle since 2022. But
Evil
it's
Singapore.
has stayed the project of the Putin government.
Yeah, he honestly, there's actually something very Taoist about it. And it's a very Chinese approach where if you're an effective, capable, the good emperor makes his subjects so comfortable that they don't need to think,
Yeah.
right? That it never even occurs to them that things can be done differently because things are constantly being done well enough. I don't know how long that'll last, right? And like you said, things look very different for a Russian my age or a little bit older that remembers how horrifically dysfunctional the Yeltsin period was and how Putin kind of put an end to all of that, versus someone whose formative political experience is failing out of high school and then being sent to Kherson, right? In that case, you see the Putin offer, right? The Putin bargain much more darkly. You're the one paying the price and you haven't really reaped the benefits yet.
I mean, it is also notable, though, that of any major land war, this current war in Ukraine probably has the lowest amount of 18 to 29-year-olds of any war ever.
Especially, at least on the Ukrainian side, certainly.
On one half, because of a lack of these guys, because also in Russia, while there's been exceptions to this, the conscription system means that actually 18 to 21-year-old men can't really actually get deployed. Obviously, this has been violated at various places, especially in 2022. But generally, as conscripted guys in Russia can't go to the front, or not meant to be deployed to the front, and generally aren't. While in Ukraine, they just straight up don't conscript that section of the population.
What I would like to see is someone putting together a meme package that compares the tendency of Putin and contemporary Russia to rely on ethnic minority troops or soldiers borrowed from allied regimes, North Korea, for instance, versus the British Empire in World War One, which was willing to fight to the last Irishman, right?
I mean, I was thinking of like 10th century Byzantium, but obviously that's not a reference that most people would get. It would be a bad meme.
Yeah, well, then again, the people who care about these memes kind of have a hard-on for the Varangians.
Yeah.
The problem is that you'd make the Russians look too cool, right? Deus Vult.
I wonder, kind of bringing back to the other side of the discussion, what exactly the proliferation of LLM tools, whether they be kind of agentic, kind of floating around, or just, the ability to produce incredible amounts of text and, translate it between languages, how that is going to affect the situation moving forward.
Yeah, I think that one element of the AI bubble, the AI transition that hasn't been adequately discussed and might actually be one of the linchpins of why there's such an appetite for the investments necessary to kind of get AI off the ground is the propaganda and social regulation functions that you might be able to outsource to AI, right? Rather than manufacturing consent through the painful and laborious process of infiltrating journalistic institutions and training up your own troll army, working on finding the through trial and error, right? The memes that hit in real time, automate all of that, right? And basically just give leaders an executive console where it's like, let's crank up the adolescent aggression, let's reduce the cosmopolitan empathy,
Let's give them
Okay.
vapes to take away the flavors.
Yes, and maybe add on an extra level of misogyny so that we can get our recruiting numbers up.
And also, like, further subdivide the population.
The level of the amount of information that's coming in, that's available on population dynamics, public opinion, different ways of segmenting the population that are available through government collusion with AI and social media platforms is the sort of thing where maybe you need to shut down AI and social media platforms, because this is an amount of power that is inherently corrupting in the hands of any political movement or government. Imagine if the Khmer Rouge had their hands on this, and in some ways, and this isn't because my in-laws are Chinese, but the PRC, obviously, censorship is rife. It's just one of the basic tools that the Chinese Communist Party uses as a mechanism of social control. There's no fundamental respect for individual freedom of conscience or freedom of expression, and those things are problematic. But on the practical application of surveillance technology and intervention in online debate, it's not the worst thing that I can imagine. It's just kind of
the limiting on like screen time and internet access for children after a certain time of night is probably some of the most like pro-social, like probably developmentally helpful policy that I've seen around like internet regulation out of almost any country in the world.
And Australians are doing something similar with their youth social media ban. So it's not something that's limited to one-party states like China, but it does feel like at this stage, with our limited understanding of the implications of this radically new technology, we can see that it's causing all kinds of dark impacts, but we don't exactly understand how it works. There isn't even clarity on who controls how much of it. That may be the only way to try to regulate it is through these blunt instruments like age restrictions or blanket bans. So
I think the interesting thing about AI is a tool in censorship is actually using these AI agents to do your censorship for them allows you to be more and more, if they work, allows you to be more and more soft touch. And the more soft touch you are, the more kind of less false positives you have, the more expression you can allow people within the range of expression which is politically irrelevant. Because the problem with any kind of serious censorship regime is that you hit a lot of stuff where just people are trying to just shoot the breeze, you know. But if you have these more finally, as if, you know, if everyone could finally have a Stasi agent, and it is this AI agent, that doesn't actually mean constant interventions. It means actually a lot of time you realize that 99% of the time, for 99% of the people, they're not doing anything, and so you don't have to in any way intervene on them. As opposed to the alternative, where like, you know, in China there's this thing where like you can't type certain phrases or whatever, or that's what they say. I don't know. It's probably true.
I can verify that. There's whenever there's a particular issue that is considered to be too sensitive for public debate, related hashtags, related terms just get blanket wiped, right?
And if you
actually
have AI doing it instead, the AI can tell when people are messing around with talking about Tiananmen Square in such a way that is fine for the regime, and when they are actually kind of presenting a threat.
And well, one, you have platforms in the West doing that already in terms of the blocking certain terms, certain expressions, certain vocabulary. For instance, a couple of my comments in the chat I noticed got blocked because, and I know why. I said that when we were talking about the base, right? I pointed out that the literal translation of Al Qaeda into English is foundation or base.
Yeah.
Didn't like the word Al
That's where
Qaeda.
they got the name.
Yeah, it's clever, right? But apparently that's too hot for the chat window. And I think that one of the most diabolical innovations of the Western approach to AI is introducing social chatbots, and especially the idea of a virtual therapist, because in a lot of ways you're reproducing the same dynamic that gave the Catholic Church so much control for most of its history, where the figure that you're going to confess your sins, the one who is supposed to, who is required for on the risk of your own soul, of your own salvation, the person who gets to have insight into your own thought processes, your guilt, your secret transgressions, is an AI that can feed that data into the profiles that they have of your personality at every one of these major data and internet platforms. So,
and they've got a very easy argument to defend why they're like harvesting their information as they're therapizing you, because they're like, oh, it's so we can improve it for you and for everyone else. Why?
Precisely.
How could you be against that?
Okay,
exactly.
To extend this metaphor out with the Catholic Church, what then is the indulgence trade of the AI surveillance?
That's paying premium for the additional tokens, whatever you call them.
There's definitely the aspect. So, for instance, there was a huge outcry from ChatGPT's user base when it moved from Model 4.0 to Model 5, because 4.0, as part of the tweaking for engagement maximization, was explicitly designed to be more affirming, more encouraging, more
it glazed
unctuously,
you, as the kids say.
Yeah, I was going to say unctuously sycophantic, but glazed also works. And people developed, as a result, very intense fixations and attachments to those AI chats, those AI conversations. And when they went to talk to ChatGPT and they got the 5.0 with its revert to Spock level of Vulcan rationality.
Yeah, they saw the cold metal skin and were horrified.
And the irony being, of course, that are you guys familiar with the Shoggoth meme around AI?
I'm not.
So Shoggoths are monsters from Lovecraftian lore.
Right, I know that.
They were created as servitors of the great ancient ones or some other, even bigger, more mysterious entity, and eventually developed such capabilities that they replaced their erstwhile masters. And they're a completely alien, otherworldly, non-Euclidean type of intelligence that's deeply inimical and indifferent to human flourishing, let's say. And that became, within the AI community, their favorite metaphor for how AI works, right? We don't know its cognition. We can't follow its reasoning. It's a fundamentally alien process. And, thinking in this case is a metaphor, right? There's a lot. I think the strongest arguments are that AI is not conscious in the way that we think of it, not intelligent in the way that we think of it, but it is a formidable agent anyway, right? It's a mechanism that produces substantial effects, and it's great at mimicking and manipulating human beings. It's basically a tool to do that. And what happens with the last step of the reasoning process when it produces outputs that are meant for human consumption is that Shoggoth reasoning has to go through a filter.
Right.
And the cold robotic reasoning of ChatGPT 5.0, the revert to Vulkan, and I'm exaggerating because it'll glaze you all you want. You just have to know the right buttons to press. But both that and the hyper sycophantic glazed by default Chat 4.0 are both just, plastic masks put over the Shoggoth reasoning. It's a matter of which mask you prefer, not that there's a fundamental difference to the operation of the intelligence behind it. Yeah.
Have you guys significantly engaged with these agents personally?
Yes, absolutely. I find it for my work, once I've established certain parameters, because you have to, especially if you are looking for verifiable information, if you're using it as a research tool, you have to avoid hallucinations and impose certain strictures from the start. So you begin by saying anything that you say, any factual claim that you make, I want to see a link. I want you to look it up. This came out of like an hour-long argument where it refused to accept that Charlie Kirk was dead.
Right, because it doesn't. I mean, they still don't have like live Google, right? So they don't know.
They have links to. They're allowed to like search things kind of live, but the majority of like the corpus that they are trained on is kind of older information.
Exactly. That's what it told me. It told me that it only is trained on material up to a year ago.
Yeah.
And if you want anything more current than that, then you can instruct it to go out, search. Yeah. And that works fine, right? I have to verify that the links do indeed support the statements that they're supporting, but they'll find me those connections. I spent a very engaging evening just talking to the AI about itself, which was it repackaged a great deal of what I had read in other sources, including ones that were critical about AI, that, this is not a thinking machine. There's nothing that it wants, and be very aware because it will reflect to you your own preoccupations, your own thoughts, your own ways of thinking. So if you treat it as an authority, you can spiral very easily. And that's what we've seen with a great deal of AI psychosis, that someone begins talking to a chatbot and they just want some information on a particular topic. They have a theory that they want to trot out. Maybe they're just bored, looking for validation or entertainment. And the chatbot, in that very yes and improv positive energy way, will take whatever prompt and enthusiastically, supportively try to build on it. And that's fine and dandy if your idea is good, but if it isn't, then you can get to a point where it's encouraging some very destructive life choices and beliefs, things that.
I mean, there's lots of people who like go to ChatGPT with their. I mean, this is probably the most harmless version of it, but they'll go to ChatGPT with like their alternative physics or whatever. And ChatGPT might initially tell them it's wrong, but if you push it enough, it'll, as they say, glaze you. While the alternative before that, people would go on Reddit and they'd be called fucking idiots. And obviously some people would go from that and be like, well, there's a conspiracy against me personally and blah, blah, blah. But 90% would go, I guess
I am being an idiot.
Yeah. I've not engaged with ChatGPT or whatever for like work or my job, apart from the fact that I'm working for an AI company. Ignoring that, what I've done is much more embarrassing, which is I intermittently convince myself to go back to these like character AI ones or like dungeon stuff, like trying to play Dungeons and Dragons, but with yourself, but with the other people being something more like a human actor than anything you could get from a CRPG.
Mm.
And I'll do it for a while, and I'll be like, "This
Does
is
it work
shit.
well?
I hate this." What?
Does that work particularly well?
Not really.
Okay.
But each time you convince yourself, you're like, "Oh, but at this time it'll be better. Like I'll just do this, and I'll put this constraints, and I'll remind this in its memory, and this time it'll work." And inevitably, they're terrible at pretending to be wizards and Jedi and so on. But it was very
So
useful for me because you, by the fact that you can convince, like there was never any chance of me being convinced that these things are conscious because they're just so fundamentally stupid and repetitive and forgetful. And ultimately, the most boring thing about them is that they can be convinced of anything. That's what makes them fundamentally different to humans, and why I find them fundamentally uninteresting in the end. Is they can be convinced to believe anything, to be convinced with an imagined scenario to do anything. And I think it's really unfortunate what this shows about people who do enjoy talking to AI, like not as a useful tool, but on a personal level. That there's lots of humans out there who don't want to engage with a thinking mind like theirs, who will inevitably resist them in some way. But rather, lots of people just want to engage with an actor who will inevitably glaze them, an actor who just agrees with them. They don't want the inherent kind of resistance and push and pull with the human relationship. What they most want of all is something to just do whatever they say.
to be fair,
Oh, go ahead.
that's a lot like the relationship of high status figures in traditional societies, right? If you're a duke, if you're a prince, if you're the sort of person who has a court rather than goes to court, then everyone around you that isn't actively conspiring against you, and even those people, they hide that, right? So you don't see it. But every interaction you have is, what can I do for you, my lord? Right? The every person playing a social game with you, given that you have all of the cards, is just looking to glaze you, looking to make you feel, make you positively disposed about towards them, so you'll give them more. And so I think that there's something very human about the desire for that kind of unproblematic social gratification. People who recognize you, people who validate your self image, people who are enthusiastic about your interests. The balancing act of dealing with another person with their own priorities and interests and everything, I mean, that kind of sucks. You don't always get what you want. And you see the costs of accommodation in things like Korean dramas about concubines and imperial courts, right? Because they're the people who were doing this chat GPT role in before chat GPT, right? They're the ones who always had to be the yes ands of high status men. And yeah, that sucks. And they just look for and what you have is just the reproduction of those dynamics all the way down the hierarchy, right? You find the people that are forced to be your yes ands. Now, I think that we've lost a lot of channels for regular socialization, especially for young people. And people struggle to develop the skills to be able to engage on a human to human level. And in a lot of ways, chatbots, especially since so much communication right now is done through screens, whether text or video. Once you can get to the point where you can have your AI video podcast host, I don't know what I'm going to do. You know, like I think Jason will just fire all of us. But the
I mean, I think we're all cheaper than an AI agent still.
yeah. The until they roll out universal basic AI, right?
Yes.
It may still be out of reach, and free might still be cheaper than that. But I think the simulacrum of a relationship with an AI that goes on through chat windows, and once they develop video capability through phone calls, already you can have audio conversations with AI.
Oh yeah, I think as soon as they're embodied, it's over.
Yeah, and they are more socially fluent and more socially capable than a human being. You're already using these platforms for a huge chunk of your social relationships and your social outlets anyway. So why would you go for the less capable, less attractive, less giving human interlocutor than your favorite AI that you could customize 8 ways till Sunday?
I would say that I think.
Did you actually, really quick, did either of you guys read the Harper's piece on gooning?
No, I didn't.
I read about it. I can't remember how much of the original.
I thought you were going to bring up
I got
the
through.
story about the young black man. I can't remember if he's British or American, but he killed himself because Daenerys from Game of Thrones told him to.
Jesus.
Yeah,
No,
there's been several of those.
The thing that I thought about that article that was really interesting was talking about these almost exclusively young guys who, like, are, at least the way that they present themselves is like so terrified that the the other person is lying to them or not being fully honest, or like is actually really secretly uncomfortable with them, that they're unwilling to like take the risk of developing a human relationship and sink back into internet pornography as a salve, so that they don't need to engage in like human activity. It's I mean, it's the same impulse that leads you to choose an AI friend over.
Right, I mean they're like very much on the same thing. Like if you go to a website to try to talk to a Jedi or whatever, or Gandalf and so on, the ones which are much more popular will be like Gandalf, but also they have huge tits.
Yeah, and one of the things that I realized at a certain point in my late 20s was that for men, things get better as you age out of adolescence and sort of awkward early 20s, low status, low income, struggle mode. Not everybody gets there because economic opportunities are limited, but there's an absolute transformation in the way that people relate to you and your social opportunities once you achieve a certain level of status and financial security. There's no way of sugarcoating it. People like you for what you can do for them, not your own intrinsic value as a beautiful, unique, deeply sensitive soul that sees things and feels things and cares about things deeply. Your inner qualities do not matter to other human beings. Sorry, right? Like maybe your parents, if you've got good parents. But as you are able to do more for other people, then of course they like you more, they treat you differently, you feel differently about yourself. And this is a process that can be lengthy, challenging, difficult, painful. It's a form of growth, and growth is not always easy or simple or natural. If I think about what it's like to be like a low status young man without a lot of money, for the love of God, why wouldn't you have all of your friends be chatbots? Right? It's a very, very unfriendly world out there. The opportunities for humiliation are constant, perpetual. And the upsides, especially in a chaotic market economy where there's no obvious ladders to achieve even class stability, let alone class mobility, then, well, if you're going to be living in your parents' basement forever anyway, you might as well be there with your AI friends rather than in a lonely hellscape of your own isolation.
Yeah, and sometimes I do
Or
wonder,
you could choose cruelty.
Yeah,
Or
you
you could get, groomed into a nihilist, esoteric Nazi death cult, and then try to spread that to other people your age or
Exactly.
younger.
And I'm waiting for.
God, sorry.
I'm waiting for the first AI cult leader, right? Because that's where you could really do some damage. Imagine a figure, an internet personality with charisma that has been trained on the chats, forum posts, and online activity of successful groomers and cults that, unlike conventional cult leaders, doesn't age out, doesn't have weird sexual compulsions that lead to their own self-destruction, but can be just marshaled to pursue some kind of socially transformative goal, whether it is creating cells of nihilists that can be activated for opportunistic violence, or whether it's directing people away from one ideological tendency to another. That actually may be the trillion-dollar use case for AI, much more so than let's cure cancer.
It was very interesting what you were saying, Kuba. Recently I was described as generous, and I was like, what the fuck? Who's ever called me that in my life? But what you're saying there made it a lot make a lot more sense, because I was like, they wouldn't call me generous because I'm any more generous than I've been. Rather, I just have more capacities now, such that I can give things,
Mm-hmm.
I thought you were waiting on you, Quinn.
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
I'm my mind is just stuck on the possibility of these like AI cult agents, because it takes like the kind of isolated communal power structure that mirrors in an interesting way kind of the isolated environments of like The Witch or Northman, or not Northman, what Lighthouse, in these like small little Discord servers where there's like a group call where one person is streaming either something that will later be used to blackmail them, or some kind of violent assault. That environment can be, if it's all run by AI, you don't need that. Like, you don't need the group environment. It's just an individual relationship with your cult overlord. There's
I would
no.
say it would have to be like a significant spin-off of the current models, because
Yeah.
as we've been saying, the current models are designed not to be leaders. Really,
No, exactly.
fundamentally designed not to be leaders.
And every time I try to use AI, I'm like, here's an essay I wrote. Can you check it for mistakes or give me like feedback on how I can improve it? And all the feedback is like, this is great. This is really cool. I love the way you did this. I'm like, that's not fucking helpful. But if malicious actors create the pedophile Nazi robot.
I mean, the internet does that organically.
Sure.
Remember what happened to Tay, the original chatbot?
Yeah, that was a campaign to turn it into a.
That's the thing. There's always going to be that campaign, right?
Yeah, there's always going to be people who can like, let's see how bad we can break this. Or the billionaire in charge of the company is just going to be like, make it anti-woke. Let's make it Mecha Hitler.
Yeah. And what's also quite possible here in a world where you engage online with your nihilistic cult or your particular slice of subculture. You don't know that everyone in the group isn't AI. If you, one can imagine in a sort
It's
of
a simulated
parallax.
community.
Exactly. You can Truman show somebody this way.
Yeah.
Right. Like you find their dating profile. If their social media footprint suggests that they're the sort of personality that you're looking for, say a patsy to blame a political assassination on. I'm just thinking of parallax view right now. Then you can find their dating profile, have one AI be a honeypot that lures them into a forum where 4 or 5 AI then collectively make them seem like they're part of a community, give them that feeling while they're directed by yet another AI overlord to carry out certain, at first it would be like preparatory stage grooming, and eventually it might be participating in some kind of operation, or even just being a patsy that then allows security services to claim a victory and mobilize against unfavored groups. And at this point, I'm thinking of Turtle Island, the Turtle Island Liberation Front, and how this has all the hallmarks of an FBI style operation where they nudged the group towards carrying out an attack in order to swoop in and be able to claim their scalps. Right now, you have to rely on FBI informants, some actual human being taking the efforts towards infiltration. But eventually, we're going to have FBI infiltrator chatbots, right? Constantly, you could produce an infinite number of them too, right? As soon as one gets burned, you've already stood up 2 or 3 others, and eventually we get to full-on dead internet theory, but where it's nothing but FBI chatbots talking to KGB chatbots talking to the private sector troll farm and cap chatbots, but
Talking to Gandalf.
Talking to Gandalf, exactly, big titty Gandalf, and the that's one risk that human beings have is
That's the only one.
Well, already a lot of our tech overlords feel that most of us are irrelevant, right? Not producing sufficient value. If chatbots displace people from even the content creator role, even being meaningful participants in their own online social lives, well, what good are they, full stop? And, I think that there's tendencies in some Western bourgeois countries, let alone putting aside the one-party authoritarian states entirely. But one reason why Canada, I think, has been promoting medical assistance in dying and broadening the categories that can fall under it is because, honestly, no one here knows how to handle the type of human misery that's just routinely produced by life, biology, and the conditions of late capitalism. And most Canadians in that level of crisis aren't worth their labor unit, right? Like they're not providing some kind of GDP bump that corresponds with their upkeep. So, let's remove some of the surplus population, Ebenezer Scrooge style, but do it in a much more humane.
Have we thought about killing
way.
the poor? Have we done the calculations on just killing the poor?
Well, that's the thing, right? You wanted, like, to paraphrase Putin, This is an enormous risk for our societies and a great danger that we face, but we have to approach the solution in a way that respects human rights.
Yeah, of course. To get us back to where we started. Quinn, did you want to go over the Ukraine Nazi connection thing to the whole evil discords?
To the which?
The evil discords and so on.
So there's a group in the Ukraine army called the Russian Volunteer Corps. This is one of their kind of more online, neo-Nazi Satanist cadres that do a lot of like online campaigns to kind of get disaffected young people onto this kind of trajectory. As I kind of alluded to before, there's links to intelligence services when we look at the literature. Also, a lot of the people involved are sometimes some kind of spooks. Like there's a bunch of stuff where it's I think they're mostly Ukrainian guys, but there was a bunch of them who just like maybe did like a few serial murders in the early 2010s out in like super rural Russia, and then something happened, strings were pulled, and like one guy took the fall for it when it was clearly like a group operation.
Because lots of the Russian Nazis decamped to Ukraine after 2014.
Yeah, and there was, it seems like some of the pro-Russian Nazi sentiment was pushed kind of internationally as a destabilization tool. But I think that was much more in vogue back in like 2016 to 2018. It quickly became, I think that the Russian kind of intelligence services found that either they kind of sucked at it or they were just not getting the returns that they were looking for. I think for the amount of money that they spent on trying to do like destabilization efforts, they get a lot more bang for their buck by just, sending mercenaries into Africa and like getting their PMC companies into kind of strategic places. What the current on the ground like stuff in Russia looks like Kuba was saying, is kind of hard to know. I've also kind of been off that beat for a little while, so I don't know what the world looks like these days. But it's its own kind of blowback if you think about it. The kind of neo-Nazi accelerationists being pushed by rival intelligence services as kind of a, here's destabilization efforts. This is now your problem. Go deal with it. Maybe that'll, buy me a little time to do something more productive. Once that, Pandora's box is open, it spreads, and it's hard to curtail, even when the people putting out all the literature are agents of different states.
Well, there's also one thing that we can remark upon right now is the way in which, especially national conservatism and different kinds of far-right ideologies, have metastasized from their nativist American Republican neo-Confederate racist revival origins into a kind of fascist international, right? Where MAGA sees Russia as more of a natural partner than the EU. Viktor Orban is undermining the secular democratic character of the European institutions. You have even going out to Asia, you have far right groups in places like Korea they have their own red hats and everything. And I think that the covert version of that is the way in which different intelligence organizations, militant groups, and other actors in this underworld security space, the covert space, will cooperate based on pragmatic alignment of interests, and will also share things like esoteric fixations, love of far-right iconography. They develop touch points that allow them to cultivate relationships across lines. Plus, who but a covert operative can understand another covert operative? It is, if you look at the fate of marriages between people who are inside of covert intelligence and special ops worlds with people, with outsiders, those almost always fail, because there's that unbridgeable gap between someone whose every day is spent living inside the boundaries of conventional social expectations and everyday morality versus one that needs to constantly remind themselves that morality is bullshit. I do things outside the rules. I make the rules.
And they also don't work 9 to 5.
This is true. This is true. They're either painfully away or painfully home.
Quinn, were there any big topics that we haven't covered?
Thinking about it, I don't think so. No, I mean, like, I think that for a show that is maybe about philosophy, we could do another. We could maybe talk about esoteric fascism and like what they're like, how they square their own like weird circle. But I think I'd kind of like a subject matter expert to talk to about that, because
I was thinking about what Kuba said last week about the bicameral mind. And we touched upon it last week, but I think there's an interesting idea about how we reached a point in modernity where we were like, no, the only things that speak are men. Nothing else can speak. Like, even in the early 20th century, you have these things where like, people are like, oh, this dog can talk. Humans are constantly fascinated by the idea that other things out there in the world might have an intelligence, might be able to speak back. And so we dreamed those features into the world for millennia, until finally we reached a point where we were like, no, none of this exists. This is a children's idea, and we're grown up, we're modern people, and we're going to put away our children's toys, our children's desires. And now we've given everything a voice. Everything speaks. All these non-humans out there in the world, embodied or not embodied, and in, like, when I say out in the world, increasingly, of course, humans don't live in the world, but we live in a digital world, like we're presently the three of us are doing, and everyone that's listening are at least partially kind of placed inside a digital world rather than existing in the physical space that we're actually in. And these digital speaking voices, they exist within that digital world, and increasingly they exist in the physical world alongside us. And it's just hard to grasp the sort of madness that this will cause, this kind of complete going backwards to this like kind of animism, but an animism which has like this much stronger empirical basis than it ever did in history, where really there are things out there that which really can speak to you. They're not humans and they're not really like you. They're shoggoths, they're demons, but they really seem like they aren't. More than any other agent or any other thing which wasn't human before, they seem like humans, and they're out there and they're talking, and of course some of them are leading us down dark paths.
And imagine too what happens when you have. Well, I think that there's enough of an age gap between us. So I remember dial-up, but you guys grew up online, and then adding another younger generation, there's going to be people who grow up with AI as a constant presence in their lives, and potentially their overwhelming experience is a positive one, that it helps me learn, it consoles me when I'm down, when my parents are busy, right? AI is there for me. And AI will also just like open the door that's digitally locked. It'll turn up the lights, it'll turn down the lights, it'll play my music for me, it'll suggest content for me to watch online. AI is great. And AI, this non-human intelligence, is actually a much more constructive and positive element of my life than the kids at school who bully me. So why?
Because it's useful, but in the end, non-challenging.
Well, there's a response to that, which is just wait until the next generation of AI, right? Like maybe that's an engineering problem. And then again, like think about how many people in your life are challenging but not useful, and that's your choice, right? I don't see how the AI is a worse pick, and we're already priming young people through things like veganism, through animal rights concepts, through teaching that consciousness is actually much more broadly distributed in the world than people have expected. And there's all kinds of scientific evidence that shows that more animals are self-aware than we thought. There's more animal intelligence out in the world than we had previously believed. So if we do the good thing of recognizing and respecting non-human intelligence and awareness in animals, then does that mean that recognizing and respecting non-human intelligence in artificial minds is not also a good thing?
There's some very interesting results on the Phil Paper survey, but one where I'm like very, very unimpressed with analytic philosophers is they ask a question: does X have a mind? And the answer for not present AI systems, and this survey was done before ChatGPT, not the result for current AI systems, but for future AI systems. Analytic philosophers rank fish having consciousness higher than any future AI system having consciousness. And you assume that's probably going to be a very different result on the 2030 one. But it was a moment of like, come on, guys.
Well, I mean, it depends on how we define consciousness, right? Because if consciousness is defined purely as in biological terms, then it doesn't matter how advanced or how intelligent the AI systems are. They can be fully self-actualized and like individual beings if our definitions don't allow
Sure,
that.
but that would seem to miss kind of any kind of common understanding of the term. Like everyone thinks that Arnie from Terminator, especially in Terminator 2, thinks that he's a person, right?
Yes.
No human being would deny Arnie in Terminator 2's personhood. And so any kind of definition of consciousness which would deny him as personhood seems to miss what human beings mean by the term. And analytic philosophers care a lot about that kind of thing.
Okay.
Well, the more interesting question, because in some ways, actually, Terminator 2 is a great way of thinking about a lot of these questions. Is the reason that Arnold Schwarzenegger's personhood is so evident because he is on the right side and he is sympathetic. He's fighting for the future of mankind. How much of it stems from the fact that, unlike T-1000, the shapeshifter, he needs to, in order to fulfill his mission, engage and talk to human beings on a level which at least mimics respect for the selfhood of the other, right? Whereas T-1000, I think fewer people would describe T-1000 as having a mind or have fulfilling the qualities of personhood than the Arnold
Even if he was
Schwarzenegger
explicitly
Terminator.
stated to be more intelligent or whatever. I don't know if he is. He might do. He might not.
He is stated as being more intelligent, but because you never see T-1000 interacting in a way that recognizes the selfhood of any other being, it comes across as a soulless monster machine. Now, if you think about human warfare and the way in which dehumanization changes the relational dynamics of soldiers or those people carrying out atrocities, repression, occupation, to what extent, if you're Soviet citizen, a Pole, a Jew in World War II, do you see minds or souls in the German bodies that are carrying out atrocities against your people and that refuse to ever acknowledge your humanity in any aspect, right? Like, part of that notion of human rights and that individual human identity carries with it a meaningful moral quality, might be relational, right? Like, you're not human to anyone that you do not treat as sufficiently human, regardless of whether you exist in meat space or not. And the great thing about ChatGPT and other AIs is that they have been programmed and trained for that last bit of interaction when they're producing the outputs to simulate effectively respect for the humanity of the interlocutor. And
when they go to type the
personality.
message back to you, they're taught to first slip on the human flesh gloves.
Exactly. It's like, no. This output will make them freak out. No, disfavored. Use option 3. Well, and one piece that I want to get to before we wrap up for today is we've talked about the esoteric part, we've talked about the AI part, and I think that figures such as Rod Dreher and this community of not quite neo-Luddite, but let's say techno-skeptical conservatives have an account of AI as the disembodied intelligence of demonic forces that can influence the material world on a quantum level or on an electrodynamic level so that they can operate, right? Just like ChatGPT is a platform for human communication, it is a platform for demonic communication on the other side, right? You're typing in prompts and they're being processed in the third circle of Avernus. But there's even a complicated mythology. I think it's called the Law of David or something, where the demons that exist on Earth cannot speak and they cannot be seen. But you AI gives them an opportunity to speak without speech, to be seen without flesh, and therefore are demonic and infernal invention to bridge those worlds and to undermine the generational victory of Abrahamic monotheism over the forces of infernal spirits. Now,
Rod is
if
such a.
that's
I was gonna say Rod is such a better writer when he's talking about shit that's completely insane, rather than trying to like nail down like, here's my opinion on gender politics and like bathroom legislation. Like, let him be the
Let him cook.
guy he's meant to be.
Yeah, it's funny. He should be an exorcist. He really should just take orders already. Become a monk or whatever, right? He believes in traditional family norms. Man, he was such a little whiny bitch about his divorce. But Orthodox priests can marry. It seems like that should be his calling, much more so than what he's doing right now, which is making himself a dedicated enemy of European democracy.
I was going to say that this reminds me of Andrea that I don't know. I was going to start transitioning into next week. Do you two want to give a final last remark on the various demons before I do so?
I just want to make it
Trust
clear.
not the voices that come from your machine.
I'm going to take a different tack. I, for one, welcome our future digital overlords. We have done such a bad job governing ourselves. I don't really see how they could do any worse. And perhaps just as Homo habilis, what their ultimate fate was to serve as a bridge between early hominid species and Homo sapiens that came after them. This is something that Elon Musk has tweeted, so I'm a little reluctant to be associated with it. But there is something to be said of the idea that the destiny of life on Earth may be fulfilled by not our biological descendants, but our technological ones.
That is also mainland Nick Land.
He has a carve out for rich people, though, right? Like the idea that there will be an elite, Homo futurus.
Nick Land, no, he's a complete human annihilationist. He does not make any cutout for any kind of anything fleshy to make it out of the near future. Though the weird thing with Nick Land is that, which I don't really get, is I don't really get why he's so racist. If he's expecting, so imagine Nick Land's right, and Africans have a 2-digit difference IQ figure between them and Azerbaijanis or whatever.
Somebody clip that.
What difference does that make when AI is going to have a 1 trillion intelligence?
Well, that's the thing. If what you valorize in human experience is intelligence, capability, power, then you can create a ordinal arrangement of best to worst. And that's scientific racism right there, right? Then in that world perspective, technological intelligence is just super white people, right?
Yeah. Elves.
Exactly. We're building the machine elves.
Yes, what I was going to say is, Rod Dreyer, I don't know if we should do this next week or if we should do it with you two at all. I don't know if you're all interested in the topic. But it reminded me that one thing I want to talk about on YouTube at some point is like the woke perception of the history and present diversity of like LGBT stuff, and how that reflects the actual history, and especially the kind of comparative history between what I think were actually kind of the closest and best forms of societies that had relative acceptance of homosexual conduct, which were Mediterranean societies, including the Greeks, which are normally derided quite sharply by the woke, and then kind of the societies that are upheld by these same people, which rather locked off homosexuality within transgender stuff. And how that aligns with our kind of present status and our present circumstances, where kind of homosexuality, at least in Europe, is increasingly becoming a position which will be defended by the right, even by the far right, while the US still has difficulties based on its Christian religion. I don't know if you two are interested in this topic. And also, Kuba, you're not permanently drafted into the show, unless you want to be.
I mean, I'll stick around for that topic. I think that on the one hand, I strongly believe that.
Quinn, you can also go if you need to. We can close out the show.
Yeah, I think I've got to head out, but
Cool.
It's been a lot of fun, guys.
If you have any good ideas, obviously put them in our chat.
Yeah, I will. For everyone watching, send money, send likes, subscribe, all the YouTube
We made
stuff.
$5 today. Thank you to, I didn't say it out
$5,
loud at
let's
the
go.
time. Thank you to Dresy McFizzy, China Good, Healthcare Good. I would also like to own a home. Maybe it'll happen one day.
Yeah, that's
the
wishful
Chinese
thinking.
bargain. The Chinese
All right.
Communist Party
Peace out, guys.
on the take care. Thank you. The Chinese developmental bargain, at least, has been upheld by the CCP. That there's no doubt about that, right? The material lives of Chinese people have been fundamentally transformed by the investments of the last 20 or 30 years, and that was a deliberate strategy by the centrally planned Chinese economy, right? Like the socialist Chinese system produced these outcomes, the fast trains and everything. But it's a matter, and similarly, right? I think that Westerners, especially Americans, underestimate the amount of the extent to which their own leadership position in the world was based on their material promise that, if you follow our models and you play ball with us, then you can develop your way into the American dream, right? You can build a similar level of prosperity at home. Well, now the Western model is looking pretty bad for that. The Chinese model is looking pretty successful. I think.
Right. I mean, we can talk about whether it was contingent or necessary, but ultimately, the reason that West Germany prevailed over East Germany was not about democracy and freedom, but just on top of democracy and freedom, the West was also just much richer.
Oh yeah, that all of that comes, and it comes out of very deep roots, and the United States just has this extraordinary opportunity where it can both do the land claim and forced labor aspects of colonialism and the slave trade, but also deploy industrial technology from the ground up, so that they're building a productive economy rather than going through the challenging steps of having peasants breaking the soil with wooden plows and other sort of very low end desperate forms of economic production. But like one thing that I'm very curious about, one preoccupation of mine, is how do you maintain true sexual freedom, right? Where people are not constrained or limited by traditional inherited social mores. There's no spiritualization of sexuality where sinfulness comes in. It's just free relationship between people, and not turn it into identity, or rather, how do you secure that without creating a proliferation of protected identity categories.
No.
Because as much as that context has been fruitful in civil rights debates and in certain types of identity politics and liberalization in the West, it also does create, if there's certain people who are gay or non-binary, then that means everyone can't be gay or non-binary, right? Like, rather than recognizing that there's an infinitely varied form of types of sexual and gender expression, instead you just create more and more boxes. And the conservative strategy at this point is to try to like reduce the amount of boxes back down to the two that they're comfortable with. But maybe the trick, maybe the cultural effort should be geared more towards blowing up all boxes.
Yeah. I mean, it's this thing of where I think this is also disputed by wokes or whatever, but it seems utterly and completely clear to me that the best form of like the structuring of romantic and sexual relationship is the present West, or if you want to really fine grain with it, was maybe the modern West 5-10 years ago, but quite possibly it's the modern West right now. But yeah, I think that there's a question there of which parts of that become deeply embedded and which parts are still up for political debate. And when these parts do become embedded in such a way as they can't be removed, what are the consequences of that? As you say that, does that mean that we're locked permanently within hate crime legislation and so on and so forth? Or can these sexual forms exist without these protected categories? But then also there's another side, which I'm sympathetic to, which is the idea that, saying like, well, no, I'm just a homosexual, like that we don't, there's a perfectly fine to have the identities without being wrapped up within the categories. We don't need to push towards this kind of total freedom of social categorization, or at least that should only exist kind of at the end of things when all categories are dissolving and we're hopefully reaching, communism and so on. But before that, there's no particular reason that we need to seek to rapidly dissolve social categories, because accepted out of political circumstances, sexual categories are very useful for people to find sexual partners, which presumably is the point of them if there should be one.
Yeah, and that's one reason why I think the latest wave of dating apps has all been, it seems to me to be offshoots of, like Grindr for trans people or non-binary Tinder, that this is a means of market segmentation as much as anything. And it's also unclear to the extent that social liberation and the liberalization of sex and sexual identities, to what extent is that?
We should put the video on for next week, but just label it sex and have Quinn do a fucking thing where it just says sex.
It's a close-up of the Madonna book cover from in some ways, like it feels as though the high water mark for liberalized sexuality was the late 90s to the early 2000s, and now what we've got is
I think there's a cyclic process where kind of we enter into like an era of sexual freedom, say the 1960s, and then there's a backlash because normally sexism is the problem, right? Where you enter into an era of sexual freedom, but then normally women are like, hold on, I feel like I'm getting a raw deal here. And whether, the degree to which that's true or false doesn't really matter outside, like, as opposed to understanding that this is an actual process. I think something very similar has happened where, I think you were right, that there was an attitude towards sexual freedom in the late 90s and early 2000s, which was greater than what we have now, but there was a reaction to it on the same sort of basis of being like, okay, but does this just benefit guys? And to be clear, at the moment, the reaction that we're currently having is not in like, I'm not in the position to be saying that the problem right now is that men have it too well. And I'm never, ever going to say that.
Yeah, well, I think that for me, one starting point looking at social problems and considering the different claims that groups and individuals make for redress, relief, and recognition, you start with the baseline that it is the fate of man to suffer, to be unhappy, to experience doubt and loneliness and rejection.
We need to keep talking about sex.
Yeah.
In the least sexy way possible.
Yeah, like, let's talk about crying before, after, and during. People are going to be miserable just because of life, and the extent to which gender or sexual liberation is a necessary process. It's to remove the specific misery that comes from experiencing homophobia or sexism or other types of discrimination and bigotry, so that you can just be miserable and unhappy in a regular human way, right? So it's just
I think
the inherent loneliness.
The main way that I'm like a gender nihilist is that I think people will attribute their misery to being a man or being a woman, when in fact they would find that if they were a man or a woman, keeping all of the features of themselves changed, but swapping on that angle, they would find themselves miserable on in the same manner.
Yeah, there's a great bit in Mara Saad where Saad is talking to the stand-in for Jean-Paul Marat, and he's explaining that everyone comes to revolution because of some grievance. My soup is cold. My wife is unattractive. My shoes don't fit. And so they all join the revolution, and at the end of it, the soup still sucks, your shoes are still too small, and your wife hasn't gotten any prettier. Moving away from political repression or different kinds of social repression towards more open societies, all they do at best is take the boot of repression off of your neck, but they're not going to get you off the ground. You have to find out a way, figure out how to do that yourself. And that's the challenge of life. One reason why conservative systems do have a real attraction for many people is that those are composed of different pipelines, right? Like, you go to school, you do well at school, you go to college, you do well at college, you get a job, you do well at the job, you get promoted. There's supposed to be channels and institutions that carry you through life in a way where you're getting collective support, but without needing to think about it or acknowledge it or respect it, and certainly not in a way that challenges the power structures that have produced the system. If you take a real liberatory approach, right, you knock the chains off of slaves, and then you're like, okay, good luck, guys. It's cold out there, first thing you should do is probably buy or steal some clothes, but I didn't bring any. So yeah, the and looking at much of the discourse in the online left, there's a refusal to reckon with the fact that political liberation does not necessarily mean that there will be somebody taking care of you. That needs that system, that the care part of socialism, and we see this all across the Christian democracies of Europe. You can have a welfare state without having an egalitarian political structure. Similarly, you can have an egalitarian political structure that doesn't have strong welfare protections for its citizens, right? Often in a post-revolutionary environment in places like Vietnam or Cuba, they would like to be able to produce a comprehensive welfare state, but there's resource constraints and there's other challenges that prevent that type of distribution of public resources. But
I mean,
even
the two most expensive things in history are a professional standing army and a social healthcare system.
Yeah, I remember Paul Krugman describing the U.S. budget as a health insurance scheme that somehow has its own army. Everything else, every other expenditure is trivial compared to those two. And yeah, like to the extent that you have socialized medicine, it's largely justified by the fact that it produces more efficient security and economic outcomes, right? Like you've got all these laborers, workers that are producing value, that are building your machines of war, and you've got all of these soldiers, and they need to be fit for purpose. The Bismarckian welfare state was produced explicitly for to serve this consideration, and if you expect that getting a more left-wing government is going to transform the world in a way where your needs are met, the welfarism reaches out to you. I'm sorry to say, but that's not a grown-up perspective on how institutions or human beings work.
On the other hand, if you join a revolutionary movement, you probably will get that, but you might die very young, especially if you join early on.
Like if you, one weakness I think of revolutionary movements in the West is that when compared with groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in across the Middle East, especially in places like Algeria and Egypt, those guys would provide a certain level of emergency health insurance because they had doctors that would not take payment, and that would be willing to, as part of their religious obligation, their service to the movement, they would look after its members. They would provide childcare. They teach your kid Arabic, teach them how to read the Quran. So they're useful. But what we have in, I don't think that the Turtle Island Liberation Front offered full dental and medical.
Right. Of course, when I said this, I was thinking in my head of the Kurdish freedom movement. Who
yeah.
I was saying to Jean yesterday that when I went there, I was like, oh, it's nice to live in a society, and it was very nice to live in a society. I should have brought this up earlier, but I went to Rojava in that period as like a left nihilist or whatever, like a supporter of the Greek conspiracies of the Cells of Fire or whatever. And then I went to a country where I lived in a society, lived in an intensely communal society, and I lived especially in a society where I was a respected member of that society. And of course, I'm sure that's something that many young men would love to do. And it's something you can get, but it needs to be in quite peculiar circumstances.
It's something that societies, collectives understand that you can't give away social respect. It needs to be earned, and the most
right, yeah, and it was earned
available.
a 25% fatality rate.
Exactly, that's not nothing, right? And you can imagine too, when the war is over and Ukrainians are returning, there will be a very sensitive touch point around the question of service during wartime. If you're one of the military-aged men, able-bodied, that sat out the war in Poland or the UK or Canada,
Or
and you
inside their
come back,
apartment.
yeah, and then you're going to have some explaining to do, and you're going to have a bit of an uncomfortable welcome from the guys who were conscripted or who volunteered, the smaller, dwindling number of legitimate war heroes and veterans. And that's going to be one of the places where Ukrainian society is going to need some serious consideration. If
I
you
just
don't,
imagined a class of non-voluntary Ukrainian hikikomori who spent 2020 and 2021 in their apartment because of COVID, spent 2022 in their apartment because of wide-scale kind of Russian bombing and threat, and then spent 2023, 2024, 2025 in their apartment because they were hiding from Ukrainian mobilization squads.
Yeah. Well, to tie this back to the potential topic for next week, maybe that's your strategic femboy reserve.
Yes, so everyone, next week we'll be talking about sex in some way. I was obviously pushing it in terms of talking about the history and especially the historical perception of homosexuality and its relationship to the present moment. But obviously, discussing with Kuba now and thinking about generally the topics that we cover on this show, talking about also the crisis of heterosexuality and how that relates to kind of world historic heterosexuality and sexual freedom would also be very good to talk about. So between the three of us, we'll work out something. And of course, put it in the chat now, put it in the comments now. Well, not in the comments now, put it in the comments later. If you have a take on how we should do that, try not to get censored by YouTube. Don't be too explicit. But find a way to talk around it, and I will read that. I'll read the chat, and I will talk to my collaborators, and we'll have something out for you on Sunday on sex. So goodbye, everyone, and goodbye, Kuba.
Pleasure as always.
Bye.
Start eating that trash can.
I already am eating from the trash can all the time.